So good afternoon. Welcome to what you need to know to run Azure Stack as a CSP. How many of you are CSPs here today? Perfect. So how many of you are here because you were tired of walking? I assume the ones who didn't raise their hands before. Okay, good. What we would like to talk to you about today is briefly at a high level what Azure Stack is and then what you need to think about in a CSP scenario in particular. How many of you already have an Azure Stack? And how many of those are ASDK, the one server version? Okay, so the majority are actually already multi-node, okay. And I assume the other ones are at some point in the evaluation process. Good. So let's level set everybody on what Azure Stack is and what we think the business opportunity is, and then we'll talk about some of the things that you need to do around it. So very quickly, what are the use cases for Azure Stack? We have seen primarily three situations in which it is interesting for enterprises, for our end customers. It is interesting in situations where there is limited connectivity. So these can be in places that are physically remote and internet availability is limited. So we have talked to people who run oil rigs, for example. And so out at sea on an oil rig, sometimes you can get out over a satellite connection, but it is a very expensive connection. So very limited bandwidth. Or people who do not have connectivity at all, and those could be scenarios like ships that go out and are out at sea and then come back. So that's a scenario. There are also scenarios where people don't trust the connectivity that they have. So sometimes there are, for example, factory floors where losing connection to the IoT system would mean stopping the factory floor. People don't want to do that, and therefore they are reluctant to rely entirely on a cloud-based solution. They look for something that can run locally without dependence on the network. The second scenario that brings a lot of people to think about Azure Stack is dealing with local regulations. So a lot of countries, a lot of geographies impose data sovereignty, data residency restrictions. Data cannot move outside of the country. And that is a reason for some people not to use the public cloud, because you're always open to questions about will this data be replicated somewhere else, will it be moved somewhere else. So in spite of all the certification work that we have done in our public Azure cloud, we know that there are customers who are reluctant to use Azure Stack, use public Azure for certain applications. And finally, there is the attraction of cloud-based development technologies, PaaS services, and people who, for whatever reason, are not ready to put their application in the cloud, but they want to start using those services, so they look for a solution that enables them to do cloud development techniques on premises. So what I'm saying here to you as service providers then is this. You need to think about the use cases that you will offer to your customers and whether they really justify getting an Azure Stack. In other words, it's true that Azure Stack can be used to dispense VMs, provide infrastructure as a service, and infrastructure as a service is very important in order to enable a lot of applications, but if that is all you're doing to do, well, there's a lot of other platforms that enable you to dispense VMs to your customers, and you probably already have a few of them, and going to Azure Stack is not really going to be cost effective, is not really going to be a strong reason for doing the move. But on the other hand, if you hear from your customers of a scenario that justifies bringing this technology because it enables one of these type of solutions, then it is worth for you to think about Azure Stack. So to repeat the same points from a different point of view, Azure Stack is interesting because it enables consistency in application development with Azure. It brings a subset of the Azure technologies on premises. It enables people to run things like app service and functions in the future IoT hub in their data centers, and that list will keep growing. And it is interesting because it delivers all of these in a relatively integrated and easy to consume way. And talking about that, let me summarize quickly what you need to do in order to become an Azure provider, an Azure Stack provider. Azure Stack in production runs on integrated systems, so think of them as appliances. So the first step will be for you to order one of these appliances from one of our OEM partners. And we have partnered with all of the major OEMs in the market, so it should not be difficult to find your favorite provider there. We will then deliver, the OEM partner will then deliver Azure Stack with the software pre-installed. There is no charge for deploying the cloud software. So unlike our traditional software upfront, where you first bought an expensive license, and then you had the right to deploy it. Here you get the software deployed and you pay only based on the resources that you consume. And the way that this is going to happen is the usage is going to be metered on your local cloud. It's going to be forwarded to Azure, and it's going to be debited through Azure subscriptions. So if you are already operating as an Azure CSP, that system will be very familiar to you. Essentially, Azure Stack is just going to add a few new meters that pertain to the resources that are available on Azure Stack, but the mechanics of the subscriptions and using Partner Center, etc., are all the same, and we'll take a look at how that integration happens. Another benefit, so the first benefit of Azure Stack is the fact that you don't have to deploy the cloud and build the cloud. That comes ready and pre-installed. The second one is the paid for consumption. The third one is that when updates are needed to the cloud, they are delivered pre-tested directly to your system. You schedule the update, and the update is executed when you decide that it is ready to go. And so there is all this validation that is taken care of you. The support is handled jointly by Microsoft and by our hardware partners. So another issue that we've tried to eliminate is the finger pointing. Is this issue due to the hardware? Is it due to the software? It doesn't matter. You open one support ticket, and we own dealing with our hardware partners on the back end to get to a resolution. So, to sum this all up, where are the business opportunities for service providers? You know that we have an extensive network of Azure regions. So, as I was saying, you need to think about what's going to differentiate you as a service provider against what people can get from public Azure. And we've talked about some of the things that you can use there. It is your geographical presence, or it is your ability typically to enable certain kind of applications. So we have seen service providers specializing in serving the needs of certain industries, or supporting certain applications and delivering them together with their services to end customers. And with this, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague Tibi, who's going to talk about the technical steps that you actually need to think about.
Excellent. So my name is Tiberiu Radu. I'm a program manager, and in the next 10 minutes, we're going to talk about what exactly you're going to do with your Azure Stack once you have it, once you understood the value proposition, once you deploy it, and you have your CSP, everything prepared. This takes way longer than 10 minutes. So what we did was we prepared a few links for you. So try these links out. I'll show you in a second what they are. No, but it doesn't. Okay. Can everybody hear me? So these are the links which get you to the videos, and the white papers I'll show you in a second. The The first link is on the Azure Stack registration and the tenant management. So once you have your Azure Stack and you have registered it against an Azure subscription, you can start to consume marketplace items. You can start to consume images from, or pull images from the Azure Marketplace into your Azure Stack stamp. So in the first video, you'll see all the steps required to activate it, the shared services subscription you will need to use as a CSP, all the gotchas you'll get through to actually register it, and then the tenant management piece, which includes activating and tagging your tenants for multi-tenancy. So a number of you said you are CSPs. How many have deployed Azure Stack in a multi-tenant environment? Okay. How many of you are using the shared services subscription and have used that from the start? Okay. So going through the video, you'll see the gotchas to deploy this and the ways you can actually do it right from the start. Now, once you have it running, there are a few other steps you'll need to understand, and there are a few differences between CSP Azure and Azure Stack. One of the big ones is the admin on behalf of, for example, which on the CSP side, when you create an Azure subscription, you as the CSP are the owner of that subscription. On Azure Stack, the tenant will be the owner of that subscription, and you will need to understand how exactly you will manage it for them, or if they just consume those resources, they'll manage it by themselves. So in the second video, you'll see a guide to enabling this multi-tenancy, to getting permissions in your tenant subscriptions, and then also the support for that. So is anybody here that has deployed Azure Stack, has enabled the multi-tenancy, and has not went through a support case? Okay, so everybody knows then how exactly you create a support case on behalf of your tenants or for yourselves if there's any issues, right? So you need to go through a specific set of steps as a CSP, but for Azure Stack, there's no difference to that. So the same way you would open a ticket for a CSP Azure problem, you would go through the same experience as a CSP providing Azure Stack services, right? Okay? Now, the third part of the session, and I only have one slide, so that was the slide I had. So the other piece I wanted to show you was on the integration. We have a white paper which you'll find at the third link. The white paper talks about the how exactly you can automate, or what you can use to automate the whole onboarding process, and to use APIs and all these resources you can go through to enable this multi-tenancy. So besides the videos, you'll see the planning, your registration, the quotas and offers, the onboarding itself, reseller models, and so on. Let me go back here. So on the third link, you'll find, if you access that, you'll get a link to a TechNet gallery page. Everybody got it? So the page will get you access to the white paper itself, and that's the document you'll find all the information. So besides the two YouTube videos, you'll find the documentation as well in the white paper. All clear so far? There's a whole bunch of information, and I promise you the videos are not so speed through, power through. They go into details on how these things are deployed. Now, the last part of my session is on what exactly you do with your workloads once you've deployed them. So let's assume you have your tenant workloads running, you have virtual machines in there, you have multi-tenancy enabled and VMs running on Azure Stack and so on. So now, how do you manage all of them for your customers? How do you enable the update management, and how do you keep track of all the changes going on? How many of you are familiar with log analytics, OMS, update management? Have you played with this? Okay. I assume you've played with this on Azure. Have you tried it with other like on-premises VMs or something else? Do you think this will be useful for running with VMs running on Azure Stack? Okay, so let me go back here. So I've got one node ASDK deployment, which is an Azure Stack one node ASDK. And I have deployed a couple of VMs. These are 3 VMs, right? And these are just simple Azure Stack VMs, nothing special about them. I don't know why this is red, but that must be a problem. But it's not a problem because we can move on. So the extensions, if you go under extensions, you'll see a new extension now for Azure Update and Configuration Management, which essentially requires just 2 things. Requires an workspace ID, a log analytics workspace ID, and the key of that workspace ID. So you'll need to provision the Azure equivalent, the Azure log analytics workspace. You'll need to have a storage account, storage automation prepared, and all of that. Once those are set, you can go ahead and add your Azure Stack VMs as VMs in the update management solution from Azure, right? So I'm not going to ask you to cover those, guys. So to enable this extension, all you'll need to do is go to the marketplace management, say add from Azure, and then here you will type Azure, assuming internet works. And then you'll have Azure Update Management, Update and Configuration Management. That's all you need to do to enable the extension. Once you do this, plus setting up the log analytics workspace, you will essentially enable this. You'll have the update management enabled, and then in the account automation, you can go under update management, for example, and then your VMs will pretty much appear just like any other Azure VMs. There's no difference in managing them. There's no difference in setting up a maintenance window, for example. You can see here I have the three VMs I showed you earlier, and then there's also an Azure VM. This is an actual Azure VM, but under the platform you'll see that there's no difference between them. So they're treated just the same. I'll take the questions in a second. So they're treated just the same. You can schedule an update window, a maintenance window, and then that window will be applied for both your Azure VMs as well as for your Azure Stack VMs. So earlier today, I had this set up for a one-time maintenance window, and then it just deployed everything. So now I have all my VMs compliant. Where's my VMs? Here. So all my VMs have now all the updates. They're all green. Everything is fine. Besides this, I have the inventory, which is pretty much a list of all the things deployed on these VMs. It includes all the software deployed, how they're deployed, and what's configured on them. And then under change tracking, you'll be able to see the changes which happen to those machines. So as you install updates, as you install software, as you do any changes on them, those will be reported here. And if you have a good resolution, it looks much better. Okay, but the point is, you would treat your VMs running on Azure Stack the same as they are, the same as if they were on Azure. Make sense? Questions?
I got here late, so excuse me if you already covered this, but you're showing me that I can take my tenants, like, because I'm a managed service provider, and I can see their Azure VMs inside of my tenant now for delegated management. Can I run runbooks from my tenant against their Azure stuff or in their hybrid workers?
So the assumption was that they gave you access to their tenant. So you have access to their tenant, and then you can add those VMs in your storage, in your automation account, or in another one created just for them. That doesn't matter, right? You have extension for the VM, and you need a workspace ID and the key of that workspace ID. regardless of where that thing sits. It can be their own dedicated one. You can have the same one for everybody. That's up to you, I think. But the short answer is yes, you can do that. So the MMA agent itself, when the updates are deployed, so when I'm not there anymore, but when I showed you the updates here, the schedule update deployment, that actually relies on a workbook to actually deploy on that VM. So essentially, it's just running on the VM. So yes. Any other questions? We'll be right over there at the Azure Stack booths. If you have any questions, we'll be happy to help you and to find the answers. Thank you for your attention.